nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
more than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
SETI's results for 2018 proves our effectiveness as a development partner, placing people at the center of our work and leveraging partnerships and cooperation to transform policy imperatives into action. With an eye on the rapidly changing global context, SETI is innovating to constructively address the emerging challenges and opportunities for the region. As part of our competitiveness program, SETI is designing precise tools to assess assets and capabilities in the productive sector to determine paths towards higher value goods and services. As our flagship program for partnerships, the Americas Competitiveness Exchange on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, the OAS, will continue to leverage good practices and the power of networks to increase trade and investment in the region.
For us, the role of the...
Recording in progress.
Oh, ok. Bueno, ahora lo vemos. Ojalá que se sume temprano. Ahorita veo.
of the OAS is very important, connecting
muy global también, eso puede disparar interés en preguntas, ¿no? Nosotros tendemos en nuestra región a mirar hacia adentro, a pensar que lo que nos pasa a nosotros solos y que no hay un contexto, ¿no es cierto? Entonces yo voy a hablar de ese contexto antes de entrar a la región, así que me parece que eso sí puede disparar algún interés adicional, por eso te lo decía, pero bueno, lo manejaremos, no me cabe duda.
Sí, totalmente.
Hola,
Justo
¿qué
es
tal,
Mafe.
Susana?
Hola, Mafe.
Hola,
¿Qué
¿cómo
tal?
están?
¿Qué tal?
¿Qué tal? Ay, qué bueno que te funcionó el enlace. Tenía miedo
Sí,
que
sí, sí,
supuestamente te mandé al Yahoo.
tuve un problema con el acceso al IE esta mañana, entonces me dio la desesperación. Finalmente he de decirte que lo resolvieron, pero como yo no estaba segura de que lo resolvieran, dije voy a mandar antes un pedido de que me lo envíen a mi mail privado por si acaso. Usé el de mi mail privado porque estaba práctico, pero ya también resolvieron el otro tema, así que muchas gracias por la ayuda.
Ok, no, bien, bien. Creo que estamos todos listos. Veo que solo tenemos que esperar que el secretario se conecte. Creo que está en Europa, entonces estaba en otro evento y tenía que llegar al hotel y conectarse a tiempo, por eso nos pidió la media hora más.
Estamos en la misma zona horaria, por lo que veo.
Sí. Así que espero que llegue a tiempo.
Sí, seguramente. Oye, me dice que no va a estar el rector, que va a estar el vicerrector.
Sí.
¿Cuál es el nombre del vicerrector?
Raúl Bao.
Ingeniero Raúl Bao, vicerrector de la Universidad San Martín de Porres.
Bueno, ya lo cambié porque tenía puesto
al
rector, así que para asegurarme tenerlo bien.
Muy bien, muy bien. Sí, yo pienso que bueno, solo nos daría falta en este momento. De la universidad ya está listo, me dice Ernesto que también la transmisión ya está conectada, tenemos a David. Lo único sería el secretario general, pero tenemos que iniciar a tiempo, 11:30, faltan 10 minutos, simplemente por la gente que se conecta, ¿no? O sea,
exactamente.
No
Y me dijeron que había unas 500 personas inscritas.
Sí, en el Zoom teníamos 500, bueno, esta mañana habían 510 personas inscritas y...
Bueno, no se conectan todos de cualquier forma, ¿no?
Claro, de cualquier forma baja el número, pero también el evento está siendo retransmitido en vivo. Justamente ahí mi colega Ernesto lo está transmitiendo en vivo en las redes sociales de OEA Oficial y también en el YouTube. Y la universidad también están tomando la señal para transmitirlo en el canal de
la universidad.
Sí. De hecho, ahí está nuestro colega David Kunza de la universidad.
Así es, Betty. Sí. A través de USMPTV está saliendo al aire la señal en directo. Ha sido un gusto, doctora Malcorra, estar con ustedes.
¿Qué tal, David? Una sola corrección a lo que me acaba de decir. Soy ingeniera, no doctora.
Ahora, con otro ingeniero que es nuestro vicerrector, va a entenderse muy bien entonces.
Soy una de esas raras avis en el mundo de las relaciones internacionales que no tiene formación de relaciones internacionales o de abogacía. Yo vengo del mundo de las ciencias exactas, que es realmente una tipicidad.
Me parece muy bien, porque va a hacer empatía con nuestro rector y vicerrector, que ambos son ingenieros.
Entonces, son ingenieros, sí, sabía que el rector era ingeniero.
Todos ingenieros, sí. Y yo también, yo soy matemática.
Pero ahí tienes, ¿ves? Está perfecto, María. El mundo de las ciencias exactas tiene que producir una transformación en el mundo de las relaciones internacionales.
Sí. Creo que ayuda mucho en la forma y en la lógica de buscar explicación a veces a las cosas.
A lo inexplicable. Me parece que el vicerrector se ha incorporado.
Nuevamente, buenos días, sí, salí un ratito, buenos días, ingeniero, acabo de escuchar, Susana Malcorra, un placer, un gusto realmente que estemos ahorita.
El placer es todo mío.
Y con muchas ansias de escuchar su seguramente brillante exposición, ¿no?
Bueno, no quiero sobregenerar expectativas, digamos exposición, después la calificamos.
No debe caer.
Seguro que sí, Susana, seguro que sí. Bueno, ¿qué más tenemos?
Bueno, el país que tiene más vínculos, creo, con la Federación Rusa es Argentina, en este lado del continente.
Sí, claramente ha habido un acercamiento, inclusive en tiempos bastante recientes, ¿no? Justo previo a la invasión. Ahora, hay que reconocer que no solamente el presidente Fernández estuvo por allí, el presidente Bolsonaro también estuvo por allí, lo cual muestra que la Federación Rusa no hace ningún tipo de diferenciación desde el punto de vista del espectro ideológico.
Así es.
Creo que todos están muy pragmáticos últimamente.
Yo decía la vez pasada que dejé el Ministerio de Asuntos de Relaciones Exteriores de Argentina en el 2017, es decir, ya va a ser 5 años, y es increíble en esos 5 años cómo ha aumentado la presencia de Rusia en la región. Es decir, cuando yo era ministra, prácticamente Rusia no era un jugador considerable en la región, ¿no es cierto? Pero después que se produjo la crisis, la gran crisis, o una de las tantas crisis de Venezuela, ¿se recuerdan aquel famoso avión que puso a disposición Rusia para que eventualmente el presidente Maduro pudiera salir del país, que bueno, no se dio? Eso generó un estrechamiento de vínculos y una táctica, yo creo, por parte de Rusia de acercamiento a América Latina, que cambió muchísimo la dinámica, ¿no es cierto? Y una táctica que como es característica de la Federación Rusa, hace el mínimo de inversión con el máximo de retorno, digamos. Es una táctica muy oportunista, ¿no es cierto? Pero que les ha valido el tener una presencia que, insisto, hace solo 5 o 6 años atrás no tenían, ¿no?
Sí, definitivamente. Y también se ve, yo creo que se está viendo ese pragmatismo de parte de la región, ¿no? De todos los países de la región, en cierta forma, como decía, más allá de la ideología.
Bueno, yo voy a hablar un poco de eso, ¿no? Es decir, al hablar de la dinámica de la geopolítica, la región me parece que tiene que fortalecerse como región, que es un gran deber pendiente, pero aparte tiene que ser capaz de equilibrarse entre los intereses de tantos actores distintos, ¿no? Y que ninguno de ellos le da a la región todo lo que la región necesita, porque ese es el tema, ¿no? Entonces, ser capaz de transformarse en un socio de distintos contrapartes, digamos, me parece parte del desafío que tenemos por delante.
A mí se me están ocurriendo varias preguntas, pero no voy a hacer nada ahorita. Porque...
Así me sorprendes.
Pero me las estoy anotando por si acaso. Para no empezar ya a hablar del tema, pero...
Para no explotarme antes de tiempo.
Sí, no quiero. Espero que también las hagan, pero por si acaso me las estoy anotando.
Siempre es bueno tener algunas preguntas sobre todo al inicio, si la audiencia no está muy activa. Después de repente se disparan las preguntas y se vuelve muy interactivo, ¿no?
¡Ay, está nuestro secretario! ¡Bienvenido!
Hola.
A tiempo.
Hola, Luis.
Ana, ¿cómo te va? ¿Cómo andas? Qué bueno verte.
Bien, lo mismo digo. Me dicen que estamos en el mismo uso horario.
Exactamente, yo estoy en Praga ahora.
Bueno, estás un poco más hacia el este, pero sigue siendo el mismo uso horario.
Uso horario. Sí, estaba he estado corriendo de una reunión a la otra, así que ahora genial, genial.
Ay, qué bueno, llegó a tiempo.
Trataremos de hacer un buen uso del tiempo, entonces.
Sí, bueno, bien, tranquilo.
Qué bueno. ¿Hace mucho que estás por allí?
Llegué el martes de tarde, ¿no? A última hora. O sea que he estado ayer y hoy prácticamente. Y estoy mañana y me vuelvo el sábado a las 4 a.m.
AM, qué horario. Simpático para salir.
A las 4 a.m. salgo acá del hotel, a las 7.
Bueno, pero igual es muy antipático el horario.
A las 7
muy
sale.
antipático.
Horrible. Horrible.
Y ahora con todos los problemas que hay de conexiones, si no tenés vuelo directo y tenés conexiones intra-Europa, suele haber unos problemas, hay que darse un margen, es increíble.
Exactamente, no, pero, o sea, y los problemas pueden ser mayores, o sea, las 2 veces anteriores que vine a Europa tuve problemas. En la última, se canceló el vuelo de KLM desde Ámsterdam o sea,
muchísimos vuelos de
salía a buscar
KLM.
otro vuelo por cualquier otro lado, o sea, una cosa, se canceló y afuera, listo.
KLM estaba cancelando muchísimos vuelos porque Schiphol no daba baja y entonces los anulaban.
Sí. Y quedé sin vuelo así de un día para el otro. El día antes nos avisó 24 horas antes que no había vuelo. Listo, o sea. ¿Tendré que cerrar la cortina o algo? ¿O estoy muy a contraluz o se ve bien? ¿O no,
Sí,
no es
eso le iba
necesario
a
verme tanto
sugerir.
tampoco?
Estás un poco a contraluz.
Poquito, sí.
Buenos días, secretario, sí, un poquito.
Vamos a ver si puedo arreglar esto. Ahora estoy más oscuro.
Sí, está más oscuro, creo.
A menos de que le dé la opción la computadora de mirar un poquito hacia la pared, no tanto hacia la ventana.
Ahí está. Sí, no, justo quedó en el... A ver si tengo alguna opción por acá.
Creo que hay que cerrar un poquito más la cortina, tal vez. Ahí ya no sé si.
Mucho mejor.
Ahí está bien, mejor.
Sí,
Está bien.
Y también un punto pequeño, secretario, nos acompaña el vicerrector, el señor ingeniero Raúl Bao, ya que el rector lamentablemente no nos pudo acompañar, solamente como una referencia.
Perfecto.
Buenos días, secretario. Un
Hola.
placer, un gusto.
¿Cómo estás, vicerrector?
Sí nos conocemos acá en vivo.
Claro, por eso, ¿cómo andás? Nos vimos por acá. Sí, bueno, por acá no, por en Washington.
Un gusto volver a vernos.
Bueno verte. Encantado.
Si ya estamos listos, creo que podríamos empezar, Betty.
Sí, yo pienso que sí. Ernesto, entonces, bueno, ya tenemos a todos y para empezar con la transmisión. Entonces, empezamos en 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Bienvenidos a toda la audiencia que nos está acompañando esta mañana. Bienvenidos a esta 65ª Cátedra de las Américas, titulada La crisis de Ucrania en el contexto de la gran geopolítica, su impacto en las Américas. Mi nombre es María Fernanda Trigo, directora del Departamento para la Gestión Pública Efectiva en la OEA. Es un gusto dar la bienvenida y saludar a nuestro secretario general, Luis Almagro, al ingeniero Raúl Bao, de la Universidad San Martín de Porres University, a la señora Susana Malcorra, ex ministra de Relaciones
She is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Argentina,
Advisor
a senior advisor
IE University.
The university, IEM University.
Perdón, creo que hay un... Ahora sí. También a todos los embajadores
Also
y
to all of the
personal de las
ambassadors
misiones
and staff
permanentes
from the
ante la OEA
permanent
y de los
missions at
países
the OAS
observadores
and of
ante
the
la
observing
OEA,
countries at the
a
OAS,
todos los colegas de
to
la
all of our
Secretaría
colleagues
General de la
and
OEA
the General
y un
Secretary General,
caluroso saludo a
and
toda
a
la
warm
audiencia
welcome
que
to
nos
all of the
sigue vía
participants
internet de toda la región y
with
otras
us from all
latitudes.
of the region
Es
and
un
other
placer darles la
countries.
bienvenida
It
y
is a pleasure
agradecer
to
su
welcome you
participación
and
en
to thank you for your
nuestra
participation at
nueva
our
edición de la Cátedra
new
de las
vision
Américas.
of this Cátedra for the
Let me
Americas.
remind you that we have simultaneous interpretation both in English and Spanish available through Zoom and through the OAS YouTube channel. Bueno, aprovecho entonces la oportunidad para agradecer a nuestros
I would like to
patrocinadores, a la
use
Universidad
the
San Martín
opportunity
de
to
Porres
thank
de
San Martín
Lima,
de Porres
Perú,
University from
en
Lima, Peru,
particular a su
and
rector, el
particularly
ingeniero José Antonio
Dr.
Chan
José
y el
Antonio
señor
Chan,
David
the
Cunza,
Chancellor, and
por
Mr.
apoyar
David
esta
Cunza
iniciativa.
for supporting this
Saludo
initiative.
también a
I
toda la
also
audiencia
greet
de la
all of the
universidad.
participants from the
Sabemos
university,
que el evento
and we know
también está
that
siendo
this event
transmitido
is
a
also
través de
being
su canal educativo
broadcasted in its
USMPTV.
educational USMP
Para
TV.
empezar entonces en la
In
inauguración de
order
esta
to
cátedra,
start for the
escucharemos
opening
a
of
nuestro
this
secretario
cathedra, we
general
will
Luis
hear
Almagro,
our Secretary
a quien
General,
doy la
Mr.
bienvenida
Almagro,
y le
that
cedo
I
la
welcome,
palabra.
and I give him the floor.
Gracias, María Fernanda.
Yes, thank you, Maria Fernanda, and I am honored to be with you today.
Susana, muy bueno
Dear Susanna,
estar contigo,
it's so good
verte
to be with
nuevamente y
you, to see
poder
you
compartir
again, and to
este
be able
evento.
to share this event.
Ingeniero Raúl Bao,
Engineer Raúl
vicerrector,
Bao,
encantado, amigas y
Vice
amigos.
Chancellor, pleasure, dear
Desde
friends,
el
ladies and gentlemen.
24 de
Since the
febrero
24th,
venimos
February
siendo testigos
24th,
de
we
la
are
devastación
witnessing
y
this
destrucción
devastating
que
destruction
viene ocurriendo en
that
distintas
is taking
partes de
place in
Ucrania. Lo
different
vemos a
parts of
diario,
Ukraine. We see it every day.
edificios civiles bombardeados,
Buildings,
gente sin vivienda,
buildings
muerte, destrucción.
bombarded,
Casi un tercio de los ucranianos
people
se han
killed,
visto obligados a abandonar sus
constructions,
hogares,
and they have,
convirtiendo a esta
Ukrainians have
la
been
crisis de
forced to leave
desplazamiento más grande de los
their country,
últimos años.
the highest displacement or migration from the last
Un saludo
years.
amigas, amigos que
Warm
nos acompañan
regards,
esta mañana
welcoming to our friends
en el
with us this
hemisferio
morning
occidental
from the Western Hemisphere and
a mis amigos europeos.
to my
Este
European
programa
friends.
fue creado en el
This
2004
program
por
was
el
created
Consejo
in
Permanente, un
2004
esfuerzo de los
by the
Estados miembros por
permanent
enriquecer el debate
office
hemisférico sobre los
so as to
principales temas
create
de la
a
agenda
permanent
interamérica,
dialogue
como
in
son la
the
promoción,
Inter-American
defensa y
dialogue, such as
fortalecimiento
the
de la democracia,
defense of
la defensa y
democracy,
protección de los derechos
defense and
humanos, el
protection
fomento
of
del
human
desarrollo
rights,
integral
the
y el
promotion of
fortalecimiento de la
and
seguridad
the strengthening
multidimensional.
of the
De su
multidimensional
creación se han efectuado más de 60
democracies.
cátedras gracias al apoyo continuo
60
del
keynotes
patrocinador, la Universidad de San Martín
speeches
de
have been
Porres,
given,
y la aportación de
promoted by
algunos
San Martín de
países
Porres University
observadores
and the
permanentes.
contribution of other
Hoy sin duda
countries,
abordaremos un
observed
tema
countries.
de gran
Today, we
trascendencia
are
mundial y
going to
particularmente su
approach
impacto en nuestra
this
región, la crisis de
international
Ucrania, el
issue,
contexto de la
the
guerra
crisis in the
geopolítica.
Ukraine, the context, the
Tenemos
geopolitical
como invitada
context.
especial para
We
la
have a
presentación
special
del tema
guest
a
for the
Susana
presentation,
Malcorra, ex
Susana
ministra de Relaciones
Malcorra,
Exteriores de
former
Argentina y
Minister of Foreign
asesora
Affairs of
senior
Argentina and
de
senior
IE
advisor for
University,
the
a quien
IEM
aprovecho para
University,
saludar
and
nuevamente,
I
agradecer por haber aceptado
give her
nuestra
once again
invitación,
a
compartir
warm
su
welcome
tiempo y conocimientos en este
for
diálogo.
sharing her time in this dialogue.
Al menos 7 millones de
At
ucranianos han
least
sido
7 million
desplazados
Ukrainians have been
internamente.
displaced
Se estima que unos 13
permanently,
millones de
and there are
personas
about
están varadas en
13
zonas
million people
afectadas,
are
que no pueden salir
stuck
debido a los
in
riesgos de
the areas.
seguridad,
They cannot
destrucción
live due to
de
their
puentes y
security
carreteras, así
issues
como falta de
because of the
recursos para
destruction
encontrar
of bridges
alojamiento.
and roads and the
Ante esta
difficulty to
situación,
find lodging.
los Estados miembros de
Under
la OEA
this
aprobaron en
situation,
sesión
the
extraordinaria del
OAS
Consejo
members
Permanente la
approved
declaración de la situación en
the
Ucrania,
declaration
condenando
of the
enérgicamente la
situation in
invasión
Ukraine
ilegal, injustificada y no
and
provocada de Ucrania por la Federación de
stating
Rusia,
their
y
opposition
llamando al
to
retiro
this
inmediato de
invasion
la
by
presencia
Russia
militar y el cese de
and
cualquier otra
requiring
acción
an
militar en
assistance
el país.
any military action
El
in the
25 de marzo
country.
el Consejo Permanente
On March
también aprobó
25th,
la
the
resolución de la
permanent
crisis en
office
Ucrania,
also
por la que
approved the
condena
resolution
todas las
of the
violaciones
crisis in
del derecho
Ukraine
internacional humanitario
that
y las violaciones y
declares
abusos de los
that
derechos humanos,
against the
exhortando a
violations
todas
of
las
human
partes que
rights,
respeten
calling
sus
the parties to
obligaciones
respect
en
their
virtud del
obligations
derecho humanitario,
in
sobre todo en
virtue of
relación
the
con la
humanitarian
protección de la población
protection
civil.
of the civil population.
Asimismo, el 21 de
Also,
abril, El
On
Consejo
April
Permanente aprobó
21st,
la
the
resolución
Permanent Office,
1195, por la que
the Permanent
decidió
Council
suspender el
approved
estatus de
the
la
decision,
Federación
the
Rusia
status of the Russian
como
Federation
observador
to stop
permanente ante
as
la
a
OEA
permanent observer at the
hasta
OAS
que el gobierno ruso
until
cese
the
sus
Russian
hostilidades,
government
retire
stops
todas sus
its
fuerzas y equipos
hostilities,
militares
removes
de
all of
Ucrania
its
dentro de sus fronteras
military
internacionalmente reconocidas y vuelva a la
soldiers
senda del diálogo y
military
la diplomacia.
equipment, and to
Cabe
start
mencionar que
the
este 19 de
democracy and the
agosto tuvimos la
dialogue.
oportunidad de
On
reunirnos con la
August 19th,
embajadora Oksana
we were
Markarova,
able to meet
observadora permanente
Susanna
ucraniana ante la
Markarova,
OEA,
a
para
permanent
dialogar sobre la
representative
posibilidad
of
de
Ukraine, to
desarrollar
talk about the
trabajos
possibility
conjuntos y
to develop
cooperación entre
a
Ucrania
joint
y la
efforts
región.
and the unification of
Desde el
Ukraine in
inicio
the
del
region.
conflicto, la región en su
At the
conjunto ha
start
expresado su
of the conflict,
preocupación
she
y ha sido
expressed her
muy
concern,
firme en su
and
posición
she's
de
been
buscar
very
y ayudar
firm
a
in
que
her
se logre un
position
cese de fuego
to
inmediato,
achieve
respaldando al
the
secretario
stop
general de las
of
Naciones
this
Unidas en el llamado a
attack
la paz e iniciativas
and
para
to
aliviar
have
los
an
efectos
initiative for
de
peace
este complejo
and
capítulo.
to help in
La
this
crisis en
complex
Ucrania
chapter.
afecta a
The
todas las
crisis in
regiones
Ukraine
del mundo. Los
affects
efectos
all of
para
the
América
regions
Latina y el
in the world.
Caribe
The
dificultan aún más la
effects for South
recuperación
America and the
económica
Caribbean
post-pandémica.
it make
La
more
subida del
difficult the
precio de los
recovery,
hidrocarburos
and
encarece
the
el transporte,
rise of
los
prices of
alimentos y los
hydrocarbons
fertilizantes, lo que a su vez
increases
profundiza
or
la
raises the
inflación
price of our
e
food, and
incertidumbre en
also
una
raise
región
the
cuya
inflation,
población es
and in
mayoritariamente
areas where the
informal y con
population
bajos
is
ingresos.
mostly informal
Los mayores
and low
precios de las
income.
materias
The
primas, el aumento
highest
del costo de
price of the
transporte, las
raw
perturbaciones de las
materials,
cadenas
this
internacionales de
impact
suministros
on the supply
impactarán
chain,
las
international
exportaciones de
supply
bienes de la
chain,
región.
will impact also the distribution
Desafortunadamente,
in the countries,
esta
in the
espiral
region.
inflacionista
Unfortunately,
termina
this
por
spiral
incrementar el
will
malestar y
increase
desafección
the
ciudadana respecto
discrepancy and
a esta
discomfort
situación de crisis,
under this crisis
que
situation.
definitivamente
So definitely,
nos coloca
it
en un
places us
periodo
in a
muy
period, in a
difícil
very
para los
difficult
gobiernos en la
period
recuperación
for
y
the governments
contención de
in
la
the
crisis
recovery and contention of the
post-pandémica.
crisis
En esta
post-pandemic.
línea, como anunció el
This
Programa Mundial de
line, this
Alimentos, es
program
probable que
as
algunos
a
países de la región
World
encaren
Food
una
Program,
crisis de seguridad alimentaria,
many countries
lo
will
cual
be
no solo
facing
conduce a
a
una
difficulty
reducción
of
de
food
la
security.
productividad y
Will
competitividad del
reduce the
sector agrícola,
productivity,
sino que pondrá en
the
aprietos a
agricultural
países
sector, but
donde
it will
ya
also
muchos luchan
make it
por
even
poner
more
comida en sus
difficult for those
mesas
countries that
día a
are
día.
trying to put the food on their
Asimismo,
tables
dadas
day by
las
day. And
asimetrías
also,
económicas y
even
sociales
the economic
que
symmetries
caracterizan a nuestra región,
that
se
characterize our
requerirá
region,
volcar
it
nuestra
will be
mirada a
required
aquellos países que
to
necesitan
have a
apoyo
view for
financiero y
those countries that
asesoramiento para
require
diseñar e implementar
economical support
políticas de mitigación
and
para no
to
retroceder en la lucha contra la
promote the
pobreza.
mitigation
La
and the
protección
fight
social de
against
los
poverty,
hogares más
the
pobres y
social
aquellos
protection
vulnerables que están
of
en riesgo
those
de caer
poorest
en la
families
pobreza
and
debe
those that
seguir
are
siendo
at the
la
risk
prioridad.
to become poor. They
Tampoco
should be a
podemos
priority.
perder de vista que los
We cannot
efectos de este conflicto en América Latina y el Caribe deben
lose this
analizarse en el
view
marco de casi 2 décadas de
because
choques
they should be
externos
under the
que han
framework of 2
debilitado la estructura
decades
económica de la
of
región,
fight that have weakened
en
the
particular en
regions,
aspectos vinculados a la
particularly in
inversión
those
y al
aspects
desarrollo de
linked to
capacidades humanas y
development and
tecnológicas,
the building
dando
of
lugar a una situación de
skills and
estancamiento
technological
de la
skills with
productividad
the
laboral y de las
stagnation
capacidades
of
tecnológicas.
labor and
Según
technological skills.
CEPAL, en lo
According
inmediato
to
es necesario
CEPAL,
sostener el
so
bienestar
in the
los
middle
sectores más
term,
pobres.
it is
La
important
seguridad
to provide
alimentaria debe ser
support to
una
the poorest
prioridad
areas.
a
Food
mediano
security should
plazo,
be a priority.
reducir la
Midterm,
dependencia
to reduce
fertilizante de
the
origen fósil
dependency
o
of
mineral,
fertilizers,
así como
fossil
aumentar
fuels,
la
as well
eficiencia
as to
energética y
increase the
transitar hacia
energy
energías
efficiency
renovables.
and go towards
Finalmente, las
renewables.
implicancias
Finally,
geopolíticas del
the
conflicto sobre la
geopolitical
región van más
implications
allá de la
in the
soberanía
region
o seguridad en
goes
materia de defensa,
beyond the
energía,
sovereignty of
alimentos
the
y sectores
defense
industriales clave.
because it
La
is
misma
food and
fragmentación
security.
frente a esta
There is a
situación
fragmentation in this situation
configurará cuán
will
sólidos somos
set
en la defensa de
how
las ideas de
strong we
libertad
are
y búsqueda
in
del
the
bien común.
defense, in the pursuit of the common
Es
good.
así como esta cátedra se
And
convierte
also, as
en un
this
espacio
keynote
propicio
speech,
para
it is
visibilizar la importancia de los principios y valores
important view, a
reconocidos
platform
en la
to
Carta de
acknowledge
la OEA,
those
Carta Democrática
declarations
Interamericana,
in the OAS
que se establecen que los Estados miembros se comprometen a lograr un
main
orden de paz y justicia, promover su
structure.
solidaridad, fortalecer su
The idea
colaboración,
is to
defender su
strengthen, to
soberanía,
defend their
integridad
sovereignty,
territorial,
the
su independencia. Además
regional
de
integration and their
condenar
independence,
la guerra de
and also
agresión,
to
la
condemn
victoria no
the
da
aggression.
derechos.
The victory
Es
doesn't
deber
give
del
rights. It is
multilateralismo
a
seguir
duty of the
trabajando
multilateralism to keep on
para que las
working
hostilidades
so that
cesen
the hostilities
y
will
el pueblo
stop
de Ucrania
and the
recobre
Ukrainian people may
paz
recover
y
peace
prosperidad.
and prosperity.
Reiteramos
And
nuestro
we
agradecimiento a
reiterate our
Susana,
thankfulness to
al equipo de
Susana,
la Escuela de
to
Gobierno
the
de la OEA
team
por
from the
organizar este
government, from the
evento,
OAS,
a nuestro
for organizing this event,
patrocinador de la
to
Universidad San
our
Martín de
sponsor, San
Porres de
Martín de
Perú
Porres
y a
University
todas
from
y
Peru,
todos ustedes
and
por
to all of
acompañarnos.
you for
Muchas
being with
gracias.
us. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, secretario general. Gracias por sus palabras. Y ahora aprovecho de saludar al ingeniero Raúl Bao de la Universidad San Martín de Porres, vicerrector, y le cedo la palabra. Señor ingeniero Bao, tiene usted la palabra.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días con todos. Señor secretario general de la Organización de Estados Americanos, doctor Luis Almagro Lemes, señora expositora de esta Cátedra de las Américas, ingeniera Susana Malcorra,
Engineer Susana
exministra de
Malcorra, former
Relaciones
Minister
Exteriores
of
de
Foreign
Argentina y
Affairs from
asesora senior
Argentina and
de
Senior
la IE
Advisor of
University.
the IE University.
Señoras y señores,
Ladies and
es
gentlemen,
para nuestra
it is
universidad
for
una
our
satisfacción
university
ser
satisfaction
parte
to be
una vez
part
más de
once
esta
again
Cátedra
of
de las
this
Américas que hoy en
Cátedra
su
of the
sesión
Americas that
65
the session 65
tratará un
will
tema de
try to
relevancia para
deal
nuestra
on an
región.
important
Esto
topic
es,
for
los
our
impactos que está teniendo
region,
la
the
crisis de
impacts of
Ucrania
the
para todas las Américas.
crisis in the Ukraine for
Ya
all
el
of the Americas. And to the
secretario general ha
Secretary
hecho una
General
mirada rápida,
has
pero
made a
muy
quick
didáctica
view,
de
but very
cuánto influye,
specific
cuánto impacta y
how
cuán grave es
the
esta
impact is,
situación
how
que
serious the
anhelamos
situation
todo
is,
se resuelva
that we
lo
hope
antes posible.
will be resolved as soon as
Pareciera
possible.
ser que el
It looks like
comienzo de este
the
siglo
beginning
XXI
of this
está
21st
marcado
century
por situaciones de
is
origen
determined
exógenas
by
a la región
exogenous
americana, pero que afectan
issues to the American
seriamente
area,
el
but that affect
desarrollo y la
the
estabilidad de
development
nuestras
and the
sociedades y la
stability
vida
of
de
our
nuestros
societies
ciudadanos.
and the living of
En el
our
año
citizens.
2020
In 2020,
enfrentamos una
we
pandemia
faced
que
a pandemic
comenzó en el
that
continente
started
asiático
in the
y que
Asian
con una
continent
rapidez sin
and that very
precedentes
quickly
afectó a todo el mundo
affected all
y
of the
llevó a
world.
nuestro
And
continente
it reached our
paralizando la
continent,
economía y la
stopping
vida
the
diaria
economy and the
de
daily
nuestros
lives
millones de
of our
ciudadanos.
millions of citizens.
La pandemia del
The
COVID-19,
pandemic of COVID-19,
adicionalmente a la lamentable
additionally
pérdida de
to the
vidas humanas,
unfortunate loss of
no
lives,
hay que olvidar que el
we
Perú
should not
fue
forget that
uno de los
Peru
países
was
más
one of those
golpeados en la
countries
región,
mostly affected.
afectó las actividades
It affected
económicas
the
y
economic
educativas,
activities
por
and
ejemplo,
educational
en
activities
todos los
such as
niveles.
in all the
Y en
levels.
general paralizó la vida
And in
de casi
general, it
todos
stopped
los
the living
ciudadanos de las
of all of the
Américas,
citizens of the
golpeando
Americas,
con más fuerza a los
impacting more
sectores
strongly those
económicamente
economic
menos
sectors
favorecidos.
less favorably
Todos los sectores
economically.
productivos
All of the
se
productive
paralizaron
sectors
en mayor
stopped
o menor medida,
in
generando
higher
un gran
or lower
desempleo en nuestra
degree,
región.
creating a high
Después
unemployment
de
in our
muchos
region.
años, volvimos
After
a
many,
ver
many
que los
years, we saw
indicadores de
again that
pobreza
the
y
indicators of
pobreza
poverty
extrema
and extreme
volvieron a
poverty,
subir
once
y
again,
los
they raised,
PBI,
they
sobre
increased,
todo los
and
países de
the
América Latina y el
IGDP
Caribe,
for
no señalaban
the
retrocesos
South
importantes en sus
American countries, the
economías.
Caribbean,
En el
they
caso
had
de la vida
losses in their
académica
economies.
de las
In the
universidades,
academic lives of the
tuvimos que
universities,
transformarnos
we had to
muy
transform us
rápidamente y
quickly
adecuarnos a métodos de
and
enseñanza
adjust
a
to
distancia para
teaching
asumir
method,
los retos
long
de
distance
estos
teaching
tiempos.
methods to
Y es
face the
gracias a la
challenges of this time. And
ciencia
it's
y a la
thanks to the
investigación
science and
acelerada
the
que se
accelerated
efectuó en
research
diversas
that
partes del mundo,
was made in
que a
different parts of the
principios del
world, that at the
2021
beginning of 2021,
comenzamos a ver una
we
luz
started
al final
observing
del túnel
some
con la
light
llegada de
at
las
the end of the tunnel
vacunas,
with the
que
arrival
han
of the
permitido
vaccines that has
retomar
allowed
paulatinamente la normalidad
taking
en la vida de
the
las sociedades.
normalcy in the
Tan es
societies,
así
the lives of
que en el Perú
societies,
la
so that in
presencialidad
Peru,
a nivel
the
escolar y
face-to-face in the
universitario
school level,
recién se ha
university level,
comenzado a
has
normalizar
just
este
started to
2022,
become normal in this year
después de
2022.
más de
After more
dos
than
largos años
2 long
en que las
years,
aulas de los
where
colegios
the
estuvieron vacías,
classrooms of the
al igual que
schools
los
were
claustros
empty, as
universitarios.
well as the university campuses.
Cuando ya veíamos que la
When we
situación global del
observed that the
mundo
global
y en
situation in the
especial de
world,
las
and
Américas
especially of the
comenzaba a
Americas,
normalizarse
was starting to
como
be
consecuencia que
normalized
la
as a
pandemia
consequence
comenzaba
that the
a
pandemic
menguar,
was receding,
nos enfrentamos a una nueva
we
situación,
faced a new
un
situation,
conflicto armado en
an armed
Ucrania,
conflict
que
in
producto de la
Ukraine,
globalización que vivimos,
product of
está
the conflict we're
afectando la
living in, which is
recuperación
affecting
económica
the
y
economic
haciendo que
recovery
los
and
estimados de
making the
crecimiento para
estimates
este
of
año
growth for
2022
this year,
sean
2022,
muy
are
conservadores
very
en casi todos
conservative
los países de
in
las
almost all of
Américas.
the countries of the
La
Americas.
CEPAL, en el estudio publicado
CEPAL,
en el mes
in
de
the
marzo
study
del presente
published
año,
in March this year,
hace un estimado de crecimiento para
estimates
toda
a
la
growth
región de
for all
América
of the
Latina y el
region of Latin
Caribe
America and the Caribbean
de no más
of
del
no more
1.8%
than
del PBI.
1.8% of the IDP.
Este informe,
IGP.
elaborado por
This
CEPAL,
report elaborated by
nos trae
CEPAL
cifras de gran
brings
preocupación para la región,
numbers of concern for
ya
the
que
region.
producto de la crisis
Since
generada entre
the
Rusia y
product of the
Ucrania,
crisis
hay
between
un
Russia and
incremento
the
en los
Ukraine,
precios de los
there is an
combustibles,
increase
de
in
los
the
principales
prices of
productos
fuels, of the main
de la
products,
canasta de alimentos
of
y de
the
fertilizantes,
main
lo que ha generado una inflación de precios
raw materials,
inesperada,
of the main
afectando todos los
consumption
indicadores económicos
items
del en
for the
2022.
families and affecting
Esto se puede resumir en tres
all of our
variables:
aspects of
menor
life in
crecimiento de nuestras
2022. So
economías,
there is a
mayor
less growth of
inflación
our economies,
y un alza
more
en tasas de
inflation,
interés del dinero.
and higher
Si bien es
interest
cierto
rates.
que para
if
la
it's
mayoría
true
de nuestros
that for
países,
most of our
Rusia
countries,
y Ucrania
Russia
son
and the
socios
Ukraine
comerciales
are partners,
de no tan alta
trading
relevancia,
partners,
dado que en conjunto dan
since
cuenta de menos
together
de
they
1% de la suma de
give
las
less than
exportaciones
1%
y
of
las
the exports
importaciones,
and the imports,
según cifras que maneja
according
el
to
Banco
numbers
Interamericano de
managed by
Desarrollo.
the
Sin
Inter-American
embargo, hay
Development
algunos
Bank.
sectores en los
However,
cuales
there are
sí hay
some
una
sectors where
dependencia
there is some
importante,
important
como
dependency,
es el de
such
los
as
fertilizantes,
the
que en el
fertilizers.
caso del Perú,
In the
el
case of Peru,
61% proviene de Rusia,
61% come
lo cual
from Russia,
obviamente está
which
afectando a la
obviously
cadena
is
productiva
affecting
alimentaria.
the supply chain, the
El
food
alza
supply
de los
chain,
precios del
the
petróleo y
raise of
el
the price
quiebre
of
en el suministro de granos y fertilizantes por
oil,
parte de la
and
Federación
then the
Rusa y Ucrania
lack of
ha
the
generado una
grains.
escasez de
It
los
has
mismos
generated
y ha
a
provocado que
scarcity of
estemos
the same,
enfrentando
and
una
now we are
crisis
facing
alimentaria global,
a
lo
food
cual debe
security
obligar a
crisis
nuestra
globally,
región a
which should force
replantearse
our
políticas de
community
seguridad alimentaria,
to
para
reformulate
así depender
food
menos de otras
security
economías y no estar
regulations, to
preocupados de
depend
los brotes
less from other
inflacionarios
economies
que no
and not
veíamos
to
hace
have
décadas.
inflation levels that
La
we
inflación
have
en el
not seen
sector
for decades.
alimentos
The
ha
inflation
llegado a
in the
los
food
dos
area
dígitos en algunos
has reached 2
países de las
digits in some
Américas,
countries of the Americas,
situación por
a
demás
situation
preocupante
that
en
is
gran
very
medida.
concerning, of high concern.
La presentación que
The
escucharemos
presentation that we
hoy
will
día,
hear
estoy
today,
seguro,
I am sure,
debe hacernos reflexionar
should
tanto a los
make us
gobiernos
reflect
como a
to
los
the
agentes
governments as well
económicos
as the economic
privados
agents, private
sobre qué
economic,
políticas se
on
deben
what
adoptar en
policies should be
beneficio de la
adopted
seguridad
for the benefit
alimentaria de
of the
los
food
ciudadanos de las
security of
Américas,
the
sobre
citizens of the
todo
Americas,
aprovechando
mainly
la diversidad
taking advantage
energética y
of the
agrícola de
energy
nuestros
diversity
países,
and
y
agricultural
no
diversity in
depender
our countries,
tanto
and not to
como el caso
depend,
de los
as in the
fertilizantes de
case of the
otras regiones.
fertilizers, from other
Les
regions, from other regions.
agradecemos
We thank
el
you
acompañarnos en
on
esta
being with
importante
us,
sesión de la
participating in
Cátedra de
this
las
important session
Américas
of the Cathedral
y,
of the
repito,
Americas.
estoy
And
seguro
once
que
again, I repeat, I'm sure
la conferencia que
that
nos
the
dé
conference
nuestra distinguida
that
invitada
our
el día de
distinguished
hoy, la señora Susana
guest, Ms.
Malcorra,
Susana Malcorra,
será
today
pues muy
will be
gratificante e ilustrativa.
gratifying and
Muchas
illustrative.
gracias.
Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias, ingeniero Bao, por sus palabras. Ha llegado entonces el momento de presentarles a nuestra invitada principal en la cátedra de hoy, la señora Susana Malcorra. Ella es ex ministra de Relaciones Exteriores y Culto de la República de Argentina entre el 2015 y el 2017. Actualmente es asesora senior del IE University y fundadora y presidenta de Global Women Leaders Voices for Change and Inclusion. Fue jefa de gabinete del secretario general de las Naciones Unidas Ban Ki-moon entre 2012 y 2015. Secretaria general adjunta del Departamento de Apoyo a las Actividades del Terreno de las Misiones de Paz y también fue vicedirectora ejecutiva y Chief Operating Officer para el Programa Mundial de Alimentos. Además, la señora Malcorra cuenta con más de 25 años de experiencia profesional en el sector privado. Antes de iniciar, queremos recordar a todos los asistentes que puedan hacernos llegar sus preguntas por el chat para que finalizada la intervención podamos darles respuestas y pasar a la sesión de
Keynote
preguntas y
speech, we
respuestas.
will have the Q&A.
Ahora me es enormemente
Now
grato y
it is
agradecer
very
a
grateful
la
and to
ingeniera
thank you,
Malcorra
Engineer
por participar,
Malcorra,
por aceptar mi
for
invitación
participating, for
y tengo el
accepting
honor
this
de
invitation.
cederle la
And I
palabra.
am honored to give
Bienvenida.
her the floor. Welcome.
Muchas gracias, María
Thank
Fernanda.
you, Maria
Es
Fernanda.
un verdadero
It
placer
is
estar
a real
aquí.
pleasure to be here.
Cuando escucho,
When I
ya lo
hear,
sabía por supuesto, pero cuando
I
escucho
already
que esta
knew,
es la
but when I
cátedra
hear
número
that this is
65,
Cathedra
me pone una
65,
enorme
it
responsabilidad sobre
gives
los
me a
hombros,
huge
porque
responsibility on
seguramente
my
estoy
shoulders
siguiendo los
because
pasos de
I am
muchos
following
que
the
han hecho de
steps
esta
of
cátedra, han
many
hecho uso
who
de esta
who
cátedra
have used
con un
this
enorme valor
platform,
agregado,
this
así que
cathedra,
espero estar
with
a
added
la
value. So
altura.
I hope to be
Antes que
at
nada,
their
por
level.
supuesto,
So
agradecerle
first
al
of all, I
secretario
would
general
like
de
to
la
thank
OEA,
the
a
Secretary
Luis
General for
Almagro
the
por esta
OAS,
oportunidad,
Luis
así como
Almagro,
al
for this
vicerrector
opportunity, as
de
well
la
as the
Universidad
Vice
San Martín de
Chancellor
Porres, el
of
ingeniero
San
Raúl
Martin de Porres
Bao,
University,
por
Mr.
brindarme esta
Bao,
oportunidad
for giving me
de
this
vincularme
opportunity
con nuestra
to
región, con mi región, y
approach my
hacerlo
region
bajo
and
el
to do
paraguas
it
de un tema que es de
under
tanto
the
interés y
umbrella
de
which
tanta
is of a
importancia en este
topic of
momento.
such importance
Es
right
un
now.
privilegio
It is a
contar con esta
privilege
audiencia, una
to have
audiencia
this
que tiene una
audience
mezcla tan
that has
rica de
such a rich
participantes. Por
mixture of
supuesto, tiene
participants, of course.
a las misiones
has the missions
que son parte de la OEA,
that are
tiene
part
a
of the
representantes de
OAS,
gobierno, pero
representatives
también
from the
tiene
government, but
algo que yo
also
valoro muchísimo,
something that I
que es la
value a lot,
riqueza de la
which is
juventud a
the
través de
wealth of the
la
youth
audiencia de la
through
propia
the
universidad,
audience of the
y por supuesto a
university
todos
itself,
aquellos
and of
que
course all
se
of those
conectan
that
por
connect,
medio
who
de
connect through
medios
the
electrónicos. Así que
electronic means.
realmente un
So
placer y
actually a
espero
pleasure,
y
and I hope
deseo
and I
que
wish
esta sea una sesión
that this will
interactiva,
be
así
an
que
interactive
si
session.
bien por supuesto voy a
So
hacer
of course,
una
if I will
buena introducción,
give a good
lo que me
introduction,
parece que más
what
va a
I think it
enriquecer
will
es el
enrich
diálogo que
is the
podamos tener
dialogue that we may have
y las inquietudes
and
y
the
preguntas que esta
concerns and the
audiencia pueda
questions that
traernos
this
a la
audience may
palestra.
have.
Estamos
And
hablando de un
we are
tema
talking
que nos
about an
ocupa y
issue
nos
that
preocupa a todos,
concern
que es
for
la
us,
crisis de Ucrania.
which is the crisis in the Ukraine.
Y como el título de
And as the
la
title of
cátedra
this
lo indica,
cátedra, this
yo
keynote
la
speech,
quiero
I would like to
contextualizar dentro
contextualize
del
it
paraguas de la gran
within the umbrella
geopolítica
of the
para
geopolitics,
después avanzar
and then
en el
go
impacto
into
específico
the
dentro
specific
de
impact
nuestra región,
within our
dentro de la
region,
región de América Latina y el
within the
Caribe.
Latin America and the Caribbean.
Sin lugar a dudas,
Without
tanto el
a
secretario
doubt,
general
as the
como el
Secretary
vicerrector
General,
ya
as
han
the Vice
dado
Chancellor, have
elementos, un
already
pantallazo
provided elements,
de las implicancias que
a snapshot of the
esta crisis tiene.
implications of that this crisis
Yo
has.
voy a empezar, si me
I will
permiten,
start, if you allow
inclusive
me,
un poquito más
even
atrás.
a bit back.
Alejarme un poquito
I
del
will go
La
back in
primera cosa
time.
que quiero
The
decirles es que
first
me
thing that I would like to
parece
share is that I believe
es
that
de un
it
reduccionismo
is
importante y de una
reductionism
sobresimplificación
and a
evaluar a la guerra de
simplification to
Ucrania
assess the
solo
Ukrainian war
desde el
only
momento que se
from the time
inició.
that it
Como
started,
bien dijo el secretario
as
general el
Secretary
24 de
General
febrero
expressed on
de
February
este
24th
año,
this
y
year,
solo desde una
and
perspectiva
only
europea.
from a
Muchas veces
European view.
escucho esas dos
Many times
cosas
I
y
hear those
creo
two
que,
things,
como
and
dije,
I believe, as I said,
reducen
they reduce
la
the
complejidad de esta guerra.
complexity of this war.
Siendo que vivo en Madrid,
Since I live
de
in
allí me estoy
Madrid,
conectando,
and I
estoy
am
muy
talking to
expuesta
you
a esta
from Madrid,
visión
I am exposed
europeocéntrica
to this
que sin
European
duda pierde de vista
centric
cosas que
vision
ya fueron
that
resaltadas
loses
en
certain
los
things,
dichos de
certain
mis
views
dos
that
predecesores
have
de la palabra,
the
porque
two
esta
speakers
guerra tiene
former speakers,
implicancias en todo el
because
mundo.
yes, this has an
Empecemos por
implication
la
in the whole
realidad
world. We should
pre-24
start.
de febrero, que
What
fue el
was the
momento que
reality
se inició
before
la
February
guerra.
24th, before the war
El mundo
started?
ya se
The
encontraba
world was already
viviendo tensiones
living
importantes.
important
Mencionemos
tensions,
solo
and we
algunos.
can only mention some of them.
En primer lugar,
First of
estábamos
all,
viviendo
we
el
were living
inicio de
in
la
the start
pospandemia, una
of the
pandemia
post-pandemic
que trajo un
pandemic that
impacto
brought an impact,
gravísimo en todo el
serious impact,
mundo,
very serious impact in the
que fue una
whole
prueba
world, and which was
fehaciente de lo
a test
interrelacionado que el
of
mundo
our
está.
interrelations in the world
Algún virus que
with
inició en
some
una
virus
ciudad
that
de China
started in a
terminó
Chinese
impactando,
city,
como
ended up
resaltó el
impacting, as
vicerrector,
the Vice Chancellor
en
stated,
países como
in
Perú, en
countries
donde
such as Peru, where
resultado en
the
costo humano
result in
ha sido
human cost
realmente
has been
significativo, ¿no es cierto? Digo
significant.
Perú porque
I
el
mention
vicerrector
Peru
lo ha
because the Vice
mencionado, pero
Chancellor has
en
mentioned
toda
it,
nuestra región
but in all
el
of our
impacto ha sido
region, the
realmente
impact has
importante.
been important.
Pero bueno, el mundo se estaba
But the
abriendo
world was
a partir de
opening,
la
starting
segunda
from the
parte
second
del
part
año pasado, del
of last
2021 y
year
en el
in
inicio del
2021 and the
2022,
beginning of
a
2022
el periodo
to
post-pandemia, aunque
period,
en realidad la
post-pandemic period,
pandemia sigue
although
acampando, como
actually
bien
it
sabemos, y
continues,
nos
as you know,
encontrábamos
and
en
we found
el inicio
ourselves
de
at
políticas
the
para
beginning of
revertir las
policies
consecuencias
to
económicas y sociales
revert those
que esta había
economic
tenido.
and social
Y allí nos
impacts.
vemos
And
en una
then we
realidad
find
de un
ourselves in a
mundo
reality of a world
en donde los
where
países
the
ricos,
countries,
los
the
países
rich countries,
occidentales
the
ricos
rich Western
fundamentalmente,
countries, fundamentally,
toman decisiones
they make decisions
muy
very
importantes respecto
important
de paquetes de estímulos
concerning the packages of
para
stimulus
revertir la
as to
situación en la cual
revert
sus
the
economías se
situation
encontraban.
where their
Paquetes de
economies were.
estímulos que yo les
Packets
diría no
of
tienen
stimulus
precedentes
that
en
had
términos
no
relativos
precedent,
desde la Segunda Guerra Mundial con
since
lo
the
que
Second
fue en su
World
momento
War,
el Plan
which
Marshall
was
de
the Marshall
reconstrucción
Plan of the
de
reconstruction
Europa.
of Europe.
Los Estados Unidos y
The
Europa
United
en
States and
particular
Europe
han habían decidido
it had decided
inyectar
to
cuantiosas
inject
sumas de
lots
dinero
of
para
amounts of money
reenergizar sus
to
economías,
re-energize
sobre
their
todo los sectores
economies,
más deprimidos de sus
mainly the
economías,
most
y para
depressed sectors
generar
of the
redes
economy,
de
and to
contención
generate
social. Es decir, se
social
vio networks,
contention
estas
networks.
dos economías,
So
Estados
during
Unidos
those
y la
two
de Europa
economies,
en
the United
particular,
States and the European particularly,
acciones
there were
de
actions
estímulo que
to stimulate
trascendían las
that
ideologías,
were
digamos,
going
pero que
went beyond
ponían
the ideologies,
en
but
valor la
they were
necesidad
putting into
de
value the need
generar
to
un
generate
cortocircuito en la economía
a short
y
circuit
generar
in the
también
economy,
la
and also
contención en
to
los
generate
sectores
the
más
contention in
desfavorecidos desde el
those
punto de vista
most
social.
depressed sectors socially.
Esta realidad
This
generó una
reality
vez más
generated
un
once again
contraste
a contrast
respecto del resto del
concerning
mundo.
the rest of the world.
Los países en desarrollo no
The
tenían
developing
manera de
countries had no
afrontar
way to face
una
a
respuesta al
response
periodo post-crisis
to the
que fuese
post-crisis period,
equivalente
which will be
a la que estaban
equivalent
llevando
to what they
adelante
were taking ahead
dos
with
grandes
these
polos como son
two
Estados Unidos y Europa. En
poles,
particular
the
nuestra
United States and
región,
Europe,
que es de la que
and
vamos a
particularly
hablar,
our region that we will talk about,
carecía y sigue
lacks
careciendo de los
and
espacios
still lacks
fiscales
these fiscal
y de
areas
las herramientas
and of the
regionales, como
regional
fuese en el
tools,
caso de la
such as
Unión
the
Europea para
case of the
Europa,
European Union
que
for Europe,
permitieran tomar
that would
medidas
allow
equivalentes. Entonces,
making
habiendo
similar
sufrido un
measures. So
impacto
having suffered
que fue
an impact that
desproporcionado
was
para
huge
su participación
for their
en la población
participation
mundial,
in the world
la
global
región
population,
se
the
encontraba en
region
una
was
desventaja
in a
que solo
disadvantageous
podía
position
acentuar las
that could only be stressed by the
inequidades
inequalities
y faltas de
and
igualdades
lack
entre
of
los
equalities
distintos países respecto de
between
los
or
países
among the different
que
countries
tenían recursos para
that
hacerlo.
had these resources
¿Por
to
qué empiezo por
do
la
that.
pandemia?
Why do I start by the
Porque
pandemic?
la base de
Because the
partida del año
basis of the
22 era
starting of
de
2022
una respuesta
was of a
con gran
response
desigualdad.
with
Es
huge
una enorme
inequality.
desigualdad en la
This
capacidad de respuesta de
inequality
los
on the
distintos países y
capacity to
regiones,
respond of
en
different
particular,
countries
como
and
digo,
regions,
en
particularly,
Latinoamérica
as
y
I
el
said, in Latin
Caribe,
America and the
lo
Caribbean,
cual era tanto de
which
cautivo
was
para
the
reacciones por parte de los ciudadanos
nurturing
por la
of
falta
the
de
citizens for
contención,
the
por la
lack of
falta de
contention, for
respuesta a sus
the
necesidades más
lack of
básicas por parte de
responses to their
sus
basic
gobiernos.
needs from the
Esto
governments.
era
This
ya una
was
realidad
already
presente y de
a
hecho se
reality,
empezaban a
and in
sentir
fact, where
los primeros
they started
estertores
feeling
de
the
esta
first
realidad. En realidad
external
parece un
factors.
siglo
So it's been a
pasó todo
century
esto, pero
since
solo
this
hace unos
happened,
pocos
but
meses atrás,
it
a
feels
principios
like
de
a
enero
century,
o
but it's only
febrero,
been
estábamos
years.
parados
So in
aquí donde
January,
estábamos
February,
viendo
we were
de
here,
qué
we were
manera
observing
se
on
podían
how
encontrar
we could find
mecanismos,
these
por ejemplo,
mechanisms, for instance,
a través de los derechos especiales de giro
through
para
the
que
special rights
el Fondo
of
Monetario
money
Internacional
transfer so that
o el Banco Mundial
international
pudieran
or the
ayudar
global
y
could help
contribuir a
and
estas
contribute
inequidades que se
to
estaban
these
generando.
inequalities that were being
Entonces,
generated.
este es el primer elemento.
So this
Tenemos
is the first
un
element.
punto de
We
partida
have a
que ya
starting
es
point
complejo
that's already
en
complex
cuanto a la disparidad
on
de
the
capacidad de
disparity
respuesta
of
en
the
reacción
capacity to respond.
a la
Is a
pandemia
reaction
que
to the
tuvo
pandemic
ese impacto que ya conocemos.
that had that impact that we
La
already know
segunda
about.
consideración
The
que quiero
second
hacer es
consideration that I would like to
de la
make
confrontación
is on
entre
this
Estados Unidos,
confrontation between the United States.
que es otro elemento
It's another element,
esencial
essential element,
que tiene un
that
efecto
has
significativo en
a
nuestra
meaningful
realidad de hoy en el
effect
mundo.
in our reality in the
Y
world.
esta confrontación,
And this confrontation
previo
or
ya a
challenge
la
prior
Federación Rusa
by the Russian Federation
Ucrania,
to
esa confrontación había
Ukraine, that
adquirido
confrontation
una
had
deriva
acquired
muy complicada.
a very complicated
Tenemos que reconocer que
scheme.
una
So we have
de
to
las
acknowledge
pocas cuestiones en
that one of
donde
the
hay
few things
acuerdo
where there
entre
is
los
an
dos
agreement
partidos, el
between the two
republicano y el
parties, the
demócrata de Estados
Republican and the
Unidos, es
Democratic
el
Party,
tema de China.
the United States, is the issue of China.
Claramente, la
Clearly,
cuestión de China
the issue of China
genera
generates
un puente
a
en
bridge
un momento en el cual casi no hay
at the
ningún
time
tema en el
when
cual
there
se
is no
pongan de acuerdo los
issue
dos partidos de
to
Estados Unidos.
agree with, the two parties may agree on
Podemos
in the United
decir,
States.
y es
We could
así, sin
say,
lugar a dudas,
and
que
it's without a doubt,
las
that
diferencias
the
entre
differences between
China y Estados Unidos,
China and the United
Estados Unidos y
States
China,
and the
tienen
United States and China,
importante contenido
they
ideológico,
have an important
sobre
ideological
todo tienen
content,
un importante contenido de
and
principios y
mainly they
valores.
have a difference in with different perspectives
visión respecto de
vision
los
related
derechos
to
humanos,
human
tiene
rights
perspectivas distintas.
that
Todo esto es
has different
absolutamente
perspectives
cierto.
or different views.
Pero
All
no
of this
podemos
is true,
subestimar
but
ni
we cannot
perder de vista
underestimate
que
or
también
lose
hay una
view that
realidad
there
de
is
una
also a reality
competencia
of
entre dos potencias. La primera
competition between two
potencia
powers.
y la
The
segunda, que
first
viene
one and the
creciendo y
second one that
aspirando
is
a
growing and
transformarse
aspiring to
en
transform itself
una primera
into
potencia
a first
eventualmente,
power eventually,
con áreas específicas
with the specific
de
areas
interés
of
por la
interest
supremacía
for
que
the
son
supremacy,
estratégicas.
and they are strategic,
Definitivamente el comercio
definitely
y
trading,
definitivamente la
and
tecnología.
definitely technology.
El comercio,
In trading,
donde
where
la
the
integración de las
integration
cadenas de valor
of the value chain
se vio absolutamente
is
testeada
absolutely
durante
tested
la pandemia en
during the
particular,
pandemic,
donde
particularly,
el
where
reconocer
the
que
acknowledging
muchísimos elementos
that
de
many
primera
elements
necesidad
of first need
dependían
or
exclusivamente
basic
de
needs
la provisión por
depended
parte
on
de
the
China,
provision
eso
by
hizo un
China
despertar
that
a este aspecto
created an awakening in this
de la
aspect
competencia y la
of the
supremacía.
competition and
Y
the
la
supremacy.
tecnología,
And the
porque
technology,
nos
because
trae
it brings us
muchas
to
tensiones
many
respecto
tensions
del control de la producción
concerning the
y de la
control of production
disponibilidad de
and the
elementos
availability of
estratégicos
elements,
como los
strategic elements,
microconductores
such as the
y de
microconductors
algunas de
and
sus
of some of their
materias
meaning
primas,
chips and
como por
some of their
ejemplo
raw
las tierras
materials,
raras. ¿Y por
such
qué
as the
menciono en particular las
rare
tierras
earths.
raras? Porque
Why
me
do I mention the
parece
rare
que este es
earths?
un capítulo
Because I
que
believe
tiene
this
una
is a chapter that
muy
has
buena
a
vinculación,
very
muy
good
estrecha
linkage, very
vinculación
close
con
linkage
la realidad
with the
de
reality
América Latina, ya
of
que
Latin
América
America,
Latina
since Latin
es
America
rica en muchas de
is
estas
rich.
tierras raras y el poder hacerse de ellas hace de nuestra región un potencial centro de interés y de competencia. Y volveré al tema un poco más tarde. Pero de nuevo, lo que también claramente está en juego es esa visión de modelos de gobierno y de gobernanza en la cual Estados Unidos y China difieren, y yo diría que Estados Unidos con más un grupo de países que comparten esta perspectiva. Claramente hay todo un efecto global detrás de esto, el hecho de que se ponga en tela de juicio la democracia tal cual la conocemos, porque haya un modelo alternativo que representa a China, que claramente es un país autoritario, que puede decir que tiene una democracia, un modelo de democracia, porque así se define China, reconoce ser democrático, una democracia muy particular con un solo partido, pero adicionalmente, lo que es claro, con una enorme capacidad para haber logrado que su ciudadanía se moviera desde lo económico a un punto de desarrollo realmente increíble, lo que ha hecho que el mundo tuviera 600 millones de pobres saliendo de la pobreza, fue esencialmente China y su política en este sentido. Entonces, desde ese modelo autocrático, pero que logra resultados, hay un desafío al modelo democrático donde lo que se dice o se piensa por parte de algunos es que la democracia no está teniendo capacidad de brindar esos resultados a los ciudadanos. Y esto, junto con esto, un cuestionamiento a las instituciones que nos hemos sabido dar después de la posguerra, después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, estas instituciones que fueron basadas en una visión que era un maridaje, una combinación entre la democracia liberal y el capitalismo. Se está cuestionando el orden global y el sistema democrático tal cual lo conocemos. Entonces, el enfrentamiento, esta competencia entre las dos potencias, la número uno y la número dos, tienen claramente múltiples facetas de implicancia y tienen un potencial impacto de
potential
enorme
of impact of
significación
huge
para lo que
significance
conocemos como el
for what
orden
we know
mundial.
as the global order.
Mientras tanto, ¿qué pasa?
What's happening in the meantime?
Tenemos a Rusia, a la
We have
Federación
Russia,
Rusia,
the
que
Russian
claramente
Federation,
había
that
perdido
clearly had
capacidad de
lost
influencia en el
capacity of
mundo
influence in the
después de la
world
desaparición de la Unión
after the
Soviética.
disappearance of the Soviet Union.
Lo que significó
What it
el fin
meant,
de la
the
Federación
end
Rusa,
of
lo
the
que
Russian
significó
Federation,
desde el punto de
what it
vista
meant from the view of
el orgullo interno, lo que
the
significó
internal
desde el punto de
pride
vista
and
del
from the
peso
view
económico, lo que
of the economic
significó desde el
weight,
punto de vista de
what it meant
su área de
from the view
influencia,
of its scope
hizo
of influence,
que la
made
Federación
this Russian Federation
Rusa durante un tiempo
for
importante
some important
perdiera
time would lose
espacio relativo.
this relative
Ahora,
space. Now,
poco a poco,
little by little,
Rusia empezó a
Russia started
recuperar su
recovering
influencia
its
en lo que yo
influence, what I consider
intervenciones puntuales
some
e
specific
intervenciones muy bien
interventions
elegidas
and
en
very well
función de sus
chosen
prioridades e intereses,
based on their
pero
priorities and
sobre
interests,
todo
but
en
mainly
función de un
in function of
impacto y
the
un
impact
retorno
and the return,
muy significativo
very
frente a una
significant,
inversión relativamente baja.
with a very
Acorde a
low
sus recursos, por supuesto.
intervention and according to the
Todo
resources.
esto,
All of
un
this,
ejemplo claro de
a
esto
clear
es la
example of
situación
this
de
is the
Rusia
situation
en
of
Siria, ¿no es cierto?
Russia in Syria.
Rusia tiene intereses
Russia has
en Siria,
interests in
pero ha
Syria,
hecho
but
una inversión
has
que la ha
made
transformado
an
en un
investment
jugador
that has
central,
grown into a core
con
player
una inversión, insisto,
with
relativamente baja, pero con un gran
very
retorno
little investment, but a high return
intereses.
for its interests. So
Rusia empezó a jugar
Russia
un
started
rol
playing
importante
an amount of
grupos interesados en
interested
intervenir
groups in intervening
en modelos de desinformación a través de
in
redes
models of
sociales, es decir, la
disinformation in the social
tecnología
media, the
al uso de la
technology for the use
desinformación,
of
claramente
disinformation,
el avance
clearly
de la tecnología
the
en ese
progress
sentido
of
ha
technology in that
facilitado
sense has
en mucho
facilitated
su uso y su aplicación
allowed its use and
en el
application
mundo.
in the world.
Ataques cibernéticos, empezó a ver
Cyber attacks,
Rusia haciendo
Russia doing
teniendo un rol importante
having an
de
important
atacar
role,
selectivamente
attacking
a
selectively
instituciones privadas
the private
o a instituciones
institutions
oficiales o a
or official
gobiernos
institutions
mismos,
or governments themselves,
la participación en ciertas
the
crisis.
participation in certain
Vuelvo a usar el
crises.
ejemplo de Siria, pero hay
Use the
otras.
example of Syria again, but there are others.
La intervención en procesos
The intervention
electorales,
in
y
electoral
esto es muy
processes.
interesante,
This is
porque
very
por supuesto
interesting
está el
because,
ejemplo de
of
Estados
course, we have the
Unidos,
example
donde
of the United
la
States,
cuestión ha sido
where the
largamente
question has been
discutida, pero no
long
es solo en
discussed.
Estados
But it's
Unidos,
not only the United
lo hemos
States.
visto en
We have
países
seen it
europeos,
in
pero
European
también en
countries,
países
but
de otras
also
regiones,
in countries of other regions,
incluyendo la
including
nuestra.
ours.
Entonces, de
So,
repente Rusia empieza a tener una
suddenly Russia starts having a capacity
llegada de
of
intervención,
intervention,
de impacto,
of impact,
que era
that was
impensable
not
hace
thought of
una década atrás.
a decade
Es lo
ago.
que
It's what
se empieza a ver
it
por
starts
parte de la
being
Federación
observed
Rusa.
by the Russian
Y
Federation.
todo esto,
And all of this
de alguna manera asociado
somehow
a una
associated or linked
forma de
to a way
desestabilización
of
de las democracias,
destabilization
sobre
of the
todo
democracies,
a través del proceso de desinformación y de impacto
mainly through the
en las
process of
elecciones,
disinformation during
que
the elections
refuerza visiones
that reinforce
nacionalistas y
nationalistic
populistas.
views and
Y
populistic
acá
views.
empieza a haber un
And here
cóctel
we
muy,
start
muy
having a
complejo
cocktail, a very complex
que,
cocktail,
insisto,
that
no
I
es
insist
exclusivo de
is not
ninguna región
exclusive from
y
any
que lo
region,
vemos
and that we observe
prosperando en
prospering
muchas partes del
in
mundo,
many parts of the
incluyendo
world,
América Latina.
including Latin America.
Claramente
This
es una
clearly,
Rusia que empieza
it is a Russia that starts
sentir que
to
puede
feeling
aspirar
that it may
a tener
aspire
nuevamente
having once again
una forma
some
de
way of
influencia que la lleve a aquellos años
of influence that may lead us to those
del periodo amplio
imperial
del imperio,
times,
no estoy hablando
in
exclusivamente
the
del periodo de
extensive
los
definition of
zares,
the
sino
empire. I'm not
también
talking
del
about the
periodo de la
SARS,
Unión Soviética.
but also the
Este es el
Soviet
contexto,
Union.
es un
So
contexto
this is the
complejo,
context. It's a
es un
complex
contexto en el cual
context,
todos los
and it's a
actores
context where all
están
of the players are
de alguna manera
somehow
relacionados.
interrelated.
Europa, mientras
Europe,
tanto,
in the meantime,
y esto es interesante de
and this
mencionar,
is interesting to mention,
vivió un periodo de
lived a
ensimismamiento.
period
¿Por qué un
of
periodo de ensimismamiento?
closeness,
Bueno,
of
porque
self,
tuvo, por un lado,
because he had a Brexit that was a big challenge for the construction of what Europe, the European Union was, and that forced Europe to see within and to make sure that that decision of the United Kingdom would not imply a breaking of the construction of Europe. So there was a huge investment of time, efforts, and attention devoted to ensuring the cohesion and the consistency of the position of the European Union and the start of the new start of the Great Britain. So it had a successful result, but it made us somehow, and I believe, Europe to be distracted from other issues, including the issue of its energy dependency, that I believe is the weakest point or the weakest link in the chain in this fact, because clearly Europe that is being committed into a green area. It kept that dependency of gas with Russia, probably without a vision of strategically of it being devoted, I believe, and distracted with an issue that was fundamental, such as the Brexit. So all of this context is what we have to achieve to reach to the February 24th, 2022. And for this is 6 months and 7 days. And I'd like to highlight it because it is the impression that there was at the beginning of this invasion of Russia and Ukraine. It was that this was something quick, that it was, as we say in my country, touch and go. And that it would be resolved in one way or another in a quick way, relatively. But it seems like from the view of the Kremlin, with a conviction that this would be going forward without resistance. And once again, it would require a huge effort for the surprise of the reaction of the president, the Ukrainian president, and the Ukrainians themselves, plus what this meant for the international. So we're talking about 6 months and 7 days since the invasion, and that there is not a horizon of exit of this reality, and it has become a very cruel war. So the Russian invasion in the Ukraine is a war episode at a huge scale, and it's part, and this is also, it's important to remember, of the war between Russia and the Ukraine that started in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea. So we had there a conflict, frozen conflict, or a reused Crimea, and with all the questioning in the region, in the east part of Ukraine, in the Donbas area, that Russia recognizes as its own. This is the highest military attack, conventional attack, in the European soil since the Yugoslavian wars. And it's not necessary to mention the horror that happened there. It's generating many victims. As well as the highest number of casualties. The Secretary General has mentioned how many have left the country, and the number of displaced individuals. It is a huge crisis, and it's a huge crisis in the European soil. So many times the focus is on it's mainly Europe, but I insist this is like this. We should not underestimate it, but we should not leave aside the effects beyond Europe. There are many interpretations concerning why the President Putin decided to go forward into the Ukraine. And in fact, many have been retaken or taken again. And in these last 2 days, due to the death of President Gorbachev, and because, as you know, there is a theory that states that Kremlin assumes as a right to go into Russia because the Western, the NATO particularly, did not comply with the commitments that were signed at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the disappearance of the Soviet Union. Commitments that, in this reading, they should not be the NATO should go forward up to the limit with Russia, but it had to leave some room in the middle, like a buffer, as we say in English. And I insist, this was taken again because there are those who are saying that these were the negotiations of Gorbachev, even when the Gorbachev himself has denied it. The reality is that this commitment to have existed verbally is not reflected in any of the agreements signed, and that still, when we consider that perhaps NATO could have had been more prudent, because the countries, when they ask this to keep in their sovereignty, none of this weakens that Russia has done invading Ukraine. And here I use the words from the Secretary General of the United Nations when he said that Russian invasion into Ukraine is a violation of the Charter of the United Nations. It is a violation of the Charter and all of the agreements and conventions from that Charter. So there is no excuse for an invasion of Russia into the Ukrainian soil. And this is the point where it is an argument that is heard, and we should discard it. Beyond the devastating impact into the Ukrainian soil, and I believe in these last few days, particularly, it's of concern to see the atomic association led by an Argentine, Rafael Grossi, has a view of what's happening with the atomic central, managed by territorially by the Russians, but technically by Ukrainians. And there's been a number of issues at the central that put at risk the obviously with all the implications that an atomic central has, or not managed or not managed. So the impact in the Ukraine is huge. The consequences on the Ukrainians and the direct on the neighbors of the Ukraine, which are the European countries, they are obvious, and this cannot be denied, but also cannot be denied, and I reiterate that the war in Ukraine is not a European issue, or only European issue. Even when it takes place in the Europe, it has a global implications in all of the world, that even far from Europe, starting in Asia, going through Africa, and reaching our own region. So there was already a reference that the Vice Chancellor referred to this in the relation of the crisis of food, energy, and of debt and financing, which are becoming powerful. The Secretary General of the United Nations has created a response group to this global crisis. This group so far has issued 3 reports, and the last one is from August the 3rd. I invite you to read it because they are actually very good, and because they demonstrate the interdependencies and interconnections in those reports that has lots of information. And of course, the talk refers to these 3 areas, express dramatic things such as there is 107 economies in the world. And I remind you that the United Nations has 193 members. So of course, more than half of the members of the United Nations are exposed to at least one of the shocks that I refer to, or a food shock, or a energy shock, or on a debt. From these 107 countries, 41 are in Africa, 38 in the Pacific Asia, and 28 in Latin America and the Caribbean, impacting 1,700,000 people. So whenever we talk about the war going beyond the Europe, this is a clear example. And of course, this doesn't consider China, that impacts all of the numbers. China is out of this classification. Additionally, there are 69 economies, more than 1/3 of the members of the United Nations, with an exposure, severe exposure or significant exposure to the 3 shocks combined, in order to be exposed to a food crisis, energy crisis, and a debt crisis for funding. 25 Africa, 25 in East Pacific, and 28 in our region. This is 24 in our region. This has an impact on 1,200,000,000 people. So these reports that are well structured from the data and statistics, they show that the reality of the war is having a dramatic effect or impact in the world beyond the impact of the prices of the food, energy, is the disruptions of the supply chain, the increase of the cost of transport, and the increase of the bonus that had already started. The bonuses started in 2021, and it has triggered together with the increase of the types. And that, of course, generate those that are called a perfect storm. Essentially, I would say there is no one that may consider as safe from what's happening. And once again, by observing this from Europe, countries where we've had these significant helps or those packets of stimulus, we observe in the European countries that inflation is starting. We're having the increase of the prices of the food and the prices of energy. So in all parts of the world, this is happening. This, of course, has brought implications in the geopolitical dynamics from one side, and has deepened the distance between the United States and China, and with movements that are increasing tensions, growing tensions, we have observed that this comparison between what's happening between Russia and the Ukraine and what could be the linkage between China and Taiwan, it is emerging more and more. Things like the visits of senators, senators and representatives to the one they increased is the discomfort of China. They show the evidence through the immediate consequences, the level of dependency with Taiwan on certain important elements, such core elements, with mainly for the most important semiconductors, and the hacking that this gives to the production, that chain value, and this reflection of what's happening in Russia it makes it more tense, the linkage or the non-linkage between China and the United States. In the meantime, China has had an approach with Russia with that declaration, not agreement, that declaration that was signed during the Olympic Games. And that declaration was a very strong declaration that brought the two countries in an incredible way. Declaration with four specific points. I would refer to one of those four. They are all meaningful, but the one that is clear is the item 3, which in which it refers to the issues of international security, and they live clearly that the parties reaffirm their mutual support to the protection of their interests, fundamental, the national sovereignty, the state sovereignty, and the territorial organization, and they oppose to any external interference. It also states that the Russian part restates the support to one single China, and that Taiwan is part of China, and opposes to any way of independence of Taiwan. So it puts emphasis on a issue of very concern and high concern, and it states that Russia and China oppose to those external forces to undermine the purposes of common objectives, any interference in their internal affairs under any pretext, and they oppose to any extension of the NATO by making a call to the NATO to leave its ideological formulations of the Cold War. So I am stopping here because I believe that's clearly this is a very hard message, strong message that was given just a few days, 2 weeks prior to the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. That shows that President Xi was not I would not say approval, but a certain view is somewhere else concerning the Russian invasion to Ukraine. So I believe that also it's possible that with all the what's happening in these 6 months, starting from, and I'm convinced that the cost, it was underestimated the cost of this invasion. I am sure that President Xi is not as comfortable as he could have been at that time, because what happened, which was quick to resolve, has become into a cruel war, long term, that we don't see a horizon in this, and that clearly the implications for everyone, including China, as I have mentioned. So all of this, which is a framework of reference, and I would like to go to our region, and which was the point of this talk. So I have made a framework, general framework, and I have done it intentionally because many times I believe our region, our Latin America and the Caribbean, in the region, we tend to abstract ourselves from this macro context and that condition, the reality we live in. And that's why that I wanted to invest some time, this time, in this longer view in time and wider in the geographical spectrum. We live in a world where everything is related to everything, where that beyond the questioning that there may be to globalization, that of course has some fundamental aspects, if it had many positive results, also it is a reality that many lost. But what is undeniable is the interdependence, that if we may think in a model of globalization and improved one, where the losers do not feel as damaged or affected, and we may find a rebalance, but we cannot deny is that we have an interdependence that is here to stay, and that applies to all of the countries in the world. And once again, the pandemic, it puts this into value. Yes, once again. So what's happening with Latin America and the Caribbean under this context? I believe that there are opportunities and there are challenges. Without losing perspective of what I said, we are in a post-COVID, and in a post-COVID period where we have not recovered because we didn't have the tools and the strength and the capacity to do it. I believe that the opportunities are around the fact that many of the commodities that we export have gotten more value, and the issue of the commodities is our karma, because it's true that we may have more income due to the export of grains and a number of things that have gained value again. But we are still depending on the external cycles of the prices without adding enough value. So the opportunity is not only in the commodities, but also in investing, in working in the added value around the commodities. That is the pending task. Another important issue is the concept of the regionalization of the training, which has come from COVID, and I believe is here to stay. All of these concepts of the strategic autonomy, the concept of the nearshoring, you have the not so long, not so far away supply chains, and a concept maybe more of ideology behind the friendly shoring, not only to make it closer, but also with countries that we share more ways of living, principles, and values. This may represent an opportunity. First, without a doubt, what we have to do is reinforce the regional integration, achieving that in a region to satisfy more the needs of the region with the region itself. The regional institutions have been weakened in this last decade, and the lack of shared vision, of an understanding, or genuine understanding that together we have more possibilities to negotiate in favor of everyone, not only has weakened our presence at the international forum, which is dramatic, the space that Latin America has lost, that's fundamental, Latin America and the Caribbean, but that has blocked the use of key instruments. The level of the interregional trading is not at the point where it should be. There is a huge room for growth, and I insist in this vision, in more regionalized vision, more regionalized view of training, such as the direct investment in the region, which has huge space. There are opportunities there. And this changing reality of the value chains would make us understand Latin America and the Caribbean could be preferred destinations of the United States and Europe as well, integrating supply chains which are closer geographically and, as I would say, as partners. So at this time that the companies are reformulating their destination to position the some shorings, Latin America has opportunities, and I believe we should think about that. CEPAL has already been mentioned by the former speakers. There is a special report by CEPAL concerning the repercussions in Latin America and the Caribbean because of the war, and it states things that are very tough. It says that annual growth, and the Vice Chancellor already expressed, for 2022 is of 1.8. And I should remind you that this is a growth that is from the fall, post-pandemic. It's a rebound from the post-pandemic, but it also says that there is a trend to go back to the slow growth of 2019 that was of only 0.3. So the horizon is where the recovery will be very slow, very difficult. It also refers to an inflation growth of inflation, which is another element, very complex element, and of course, as a consequence of all of this, an increase of poverty that in 2022 would increase to 33.7%, with a starting point in 2018 of 29.8. And extreme poverty, again, in the same period, going from 10.4% to 14.9%. So it implies that 7.8 million people will be under the risk to fall in food security, food insecurity, and a number that will add to 86.4 million that are already facing that reality. So the numbers are really, really tough or really harsh. They are difficult, and they call to a need from the governments to respond, to give proactive responses with this challenge, as I expressed before, that the fiscal room that the governments have in general terms in the region is very limited. So the first recommendation is to leave or to reinforce for those who have money policies or fiscal policies, but anti-inflation inflation policies, to use the fiscal policy as a central element of that element of development, increasing, yes, the income, the fiscal income, and reducing the evasion, which is a drama in our region. And together with that improvement of income due to the reduction of the tax evasion, to improve the taxation into a more productive area. So all of this is harsh, it's tough, it's difficult, but I believe if we don't do it, those citizens that feel that are not getting what they need will start expressing more and more in a strong way and clear way. And the democratic institutions may feel this pressure. The food insecurity, the fertilizers, I have already mentioned that. The Vice Chancellor mentioned that. Here we have an important dependency of the fertilizers. We observe the in our region what it means, that concept means of strategic independence. We are a region of huge wealth and production of food, and in fact we are of those that provide more food to the world, but this wealth is conditioned to the availability of fertilizers that unfortunately in an important percentage come from Russia and from the Ukraine. So to find efficiencies in the use of the fertilizers and the development of alternative models, it's key, especially for the next harvesting that will start now. So, and of course, in the energy security, there is an opportunity because the region has a lot of generation of green generation. So there we have an opportunity, as well as with in the very short term, the possibility to export gas, which is the most immediate demand, especially in Europe. So how do I see the situation of the region? I see it that it needs desperately the energy integration, the regional integration, which was one of the tasks in the vision, for instance, of the UNASUR when it was created, and then it was twisted by an ideological from some members, ideological position from some members of UNASUR, and clearly the participation of the society in the income, improving the incomes, yes, but with a change in the fiscal regimes and establishing dialogue mechanisms to solve some of the issues that we have. All of this is absolutely necessary. And I believe that we have to do everything possible to mitigate the negative impact already being produced and to find the solutions with the tools we have, and the tools we should reinforce through stronger reintegration. All of this, and I insist, in a context, a very polarized context of the geopolitics, which may be that also the geopolitics, it may increase tensions and pressures in our region. We should not forget, as I expressed at the beginning, that one of the factors of this challenge between the United States and China is related to technology. I should remind you once again that our region has an important role in the provision of rare materials rare earths or minerals which are fundamental if in the availability of microprocessors or chips, and that China has gained a huge room in that sense, as well of lithium. So this may put some additional pressure on Latin America concerning the choosing these alignments. So I believe that if we come together as a region, if we are more integrated, we will have more possibilities to be partners, reliable partners. I insist Europe because it may help us with the balance. We have to observe the opportunities we have in Africa and Asia that may mean partnerships, strategic partnerships that may bring some higher wealth or higher strength in this world, which is so polarized. We have a lot ahead of us. It is a very difficult time. It is a time where the factors, economic factors, financial impacts, and the crisis are very strong. But I believe that if we are capable of linking, of coming together, of integrating ourselves, as we observed sometime and we didn't stop doing, we have a possibility to find some common ways out to may help us to reach a point where, which is fundamental, which is the democracies that we were hard to get in our regions, that we fought for, could not be affected by this, the populisms and are bringing, and that the technologies and the social networks are facilitating. So once again, this is a world where everything is related to everything, and we have to come together as a region so as to face it more strong way. So I close here. I believe that it's important to leave room for the dialogue. So I am open to any questions and all the concerns you may have. My introduction may have generated. Thank you so much. The energy integration is important. Latin America and eventually the Caribbean, through the different ways of approach. If they don't achieve an energy matrix, it is an absolutely and total waste of opportunity. And that matrix has an impact on food, because if we have a good integration of energy and that reaches all of the countries, we will be able to produce much cheaper and for everyone. I believe that's what's fundamental, to go forward in things that we have discussed and we have not materialized. So I would say that this is a time of leaving words, the expressions, and it's a time to do things. This would be my call to the governments in the region, to start thinking with a certain level of pragmatism that may reach things and make them real, and put in value the basic agreements, because the basic agreements have to go beyond the differences, the circumstantial and ideological differences, because the governments will be from some ideology or others according to the sovereignty of the citizens. So we have to have those basic agreements which may allow ensuring. So there is a privilege of the region with the materials or the energy we have in the region, which is what we are not doing. Thank you. I believe in the answer you just given, Susan, you have also touched upon Hector Luis Cabrera. Was also asking how in the region was affected by the war in Ukraine, because there will be the lack of supply. Will there be any economic or social contention that may allow to mitigate these realities? So it wouldn't be the food security wouldn't be as impacted. What will contribute for poverty? Because in Peru, the governmental response is not helping in this. Would you like to add to food security, or what should I believe that CEPAL itself has a number of recommendations, and I invite you to view the report by CEPAL on how to respond to the impact of the crisis in Ukraine. I made some reference to that report, but CEPAL states that yes, the governments have to establish proactive policies so as to have this into account. But the CEPAL itself says that it will increase in a significant number in the amount of people who are exposed to the food security, the food crisis. And it says that we have to reduce the dependency of the import of fertilizers. That's interesting, because as a region, we are in condition to produce fertilizers. It is as we have forgotten that this raw material coming from Russia and the Ukraine was of maximized dependence, that if there was what is being produced now, it would be a break-in. So we have to work on the production of fertilizers, as well as mechanisms on ways of alternatives to fertilizers. So clearly we have to promote agreements, and CEPAL states that, of contention of the prices of the basic needs, the basic items, and in everything possible to promote the self-consumption. In other words, the part is sustainable, to be sustainable, and also to eliminate the tariffs because they are meaningful impacts. We have other questions here. Del Macalvo. Do you think Latin America should mediate for the peace in a united way as an actor in the system, the national system? And then Ramon Antonio Felipe. Do you think that globalization is the cause of the world conflict, or is the conflict is the weakening of globalization? Concerning the question, the region mediating for peace, I would say that Latin America has and the Caribbean have a lot of similarities, positive similarities. One of them is that it's a region in peace. Beyond some specific issues that have been resolved, essentially Latin America is a region in peace. This is an attribute that not many regions in the world, I would say, the only one can say, because Europe used to have it, but now it's been broken with this invasion. The second thing is starting from the signing of the Trilateral Agreement. Latin America has decided to get rid of nuclear weapons. It is a decision, very strong decision, very solid, that shows what Latin America means as a model, as an example. Just to tell you that, remind you that in the 60s, there was at the United Nations an inventory of the 10 potential crises, the most serious crises. And one of those were Brazil and Argentina facing each other in a nuclear way. So now, as we are, that would be unthinkable, that scenario, because we have decided collectively to leave back the nuclear weapons. So, from the history, from the background, from the values, from the principles, from the institutions, and the participation in the global governance, Latin America has a lot to offer. I believe, and I am sorry to say, that Latin America has lost a huge room in the mainly in the United Nations, but in all of the institutions of governance, global governance, and it has lost it because it has lost itself as a region. Now it's almost possible that Latin America may present a position, coordinated position, and uniform position at the General Assembly. That was the absolute, undeniable starting point in the past. Not only to present a coordinated position and really actually proactive, but it was a reference for the rest of the world, that such position. Latin America is the founder of the United Nations, and what Latin America had in this context of the OAS was a reference for the Charter of the United Nations. So I'm giving a long answer, but it has actually a monosyllable to answer. This is yes, without a doubt, Latin America should be in a mediation position. But in order to do it, it has to recover that capacity as a region that has lost. And that is fundamental. That has an impact on peace and security. It has an impact on positions concerning training, on positions concerning energy, on everything. So I believe fundamental that the citizens in Latin America, we should demand our governments to start the leadership, to gain the leadership again, to recover that leadership. The interests in common are so important, so as to leave behind or leave out some of the ideological positions that will be there, because the governments come and go in the different countries, and they will come and go with different ideological positions. The question if the globalization has triggered this crisis. First, I believe that globalization is an issue that we have to manage with a lot of care, very carefully. And I insist, and I stated in my introduction, that globalization has brought many issues. To say that globalization has been everything positive and fantastic, that's a lie. There are some, yes, winners and losers in this field. And to measure only those winners is a simplification that prevents us actually to solve pending issues of the globalization. When I remember that I mentioned when I talked to Paul Krugman when he won, when President Trump won the elections, and I was asking him because we got surprised with that result, why they had lost the radar so clearly in those electoral results. So Krugman told me something that I always remember, because we didn't understand the geolocalization of the problems. And I translate. He was saying the President Obama generated 4 million jobs during his government, which was an extraordinary achievement. I believe it's the third best presidency in the history of the United States. Only that those positions were in the coasts or some big cities, and they were lost in the heart of the United States, which is the Midwest. So the Midwest lost jobs, and those who lost them. They didn't have any alternative. They have a choice. That was due to the globalization, the evolution of technology, and so on. But we have to find solutions. And I give the example of the United States within the United States, but also there are countries that lost and countries that won, not only their citizens, but countries globally speaking. As a conclusion, the interdependency, which is what I like to talk about more than globalization, is undeniable. No country in the world today can produce everything that it needs by itself. It's interdependent, and I insist, COVID gave it a value. That interdependency has to have a strategic view, generating value chains, which is as long that the masks, the face masks used for COVID could only come from China. That was insane. They have to be elements of a strategic vision, a political vision that may say certain things. We have to manage them not only due to the condition of the cost, direct cost, but the potential cost because we lack of them, as the potential cost to have our citizens without any type of coverage. So it's more complex, it's more difficult to solve, and again, part of the issue we face is that indeed, yes, all of this reality that we live, all of these challenges that we have, they are complex challenges that don't have magical solutions. So that's from there is where we have that temptation of the populism that's to solve with a magical response, with a short answer, with a tweet. All of these complex issues. It's not like that. It's not like that. So there we have more than ever the need of the education, the need of informing and to be informed, understanding the depth of the issues, and for the governments, for the leaders, to be capable of presenting options for solutions that may go beyond an answer in a tweet. Thank you. Juan Gonzalez is asking about democracy. In the new context with the breaking of democracy, what is being formed in Latin America? How will this be faced? And then another question by Miriam Hernandez. In what way can Central America have and generate agreements for energy with China that lacks, in some cases, of trading agreements and may protect both and may not be affected? Concerning democracy, I don't agree, maybe in a direct, face-to-face, maybe I understand better question. I don't agree that there is, in Latin America, there's a breaking of democracy. I believe that for those of us who have our years and we have gray hair, Latin America went through terrible periods, dark periods, where the breaking of democracy was an issue, a daily issue, where when the issues could not be solved, the military were called, therefore, and that brought consequences, terrible consequences for the region. I don't feel that we are in such a reality. I believe that the institutions that we have given to ourselves, they are still institutions that are valued in the region. It's true, it's true that within the institutions and democracy, the elections being one, during the elections, we have this breaking or disruptions of players that are not the traditional players of the democracy, and then many times they bring visions, populistic visions, that simplify the issue that democracy has to resolve. So I would not say that there is a breaking of democracy in Latin America. Some exceptions, maybe, with a couple of examples, but in general terms, what I believe is that democracy is being challenged, not in Latin America, in the world, because democracy is not being able to give response to the needs of the citizens. And that is a huge issue. And I mentioned that during my presentation. China is challenging that. China says we can deliver, we can give answer. So the issue of democracy in the 21st century is an issue of being capable of listening, but mainly of managing and achieving results. And there we have a complexity without, many people are studying this, and I devote some time to this, but my answer is not magical either. How to do so that exam, that test, every 2 to 3 years of the frameworks in the different countries during the elections may not condition the political leaders to such a point that they may not be capable of making the long-term decisions which are necessary. Because part of the problem we are having is that we are not achieving the big transformations that are required, because these are decisions that go beyond the electoral circle, that go beyond the short term. So we are pushed by the short term, by that attempt, or in fact achieving what is required as a transformation so that a citizen may get what he needs. So this is, for me, the big answer that we don't have. Many of these things require leaderships, and that we're not having enough representation. So I always remember, beyond what the Churchill's figure may generate as sympathy or not in people, Churchill was capable of saying blood, sweat, and tears. How many of our political leaders today would be capable of suggesting blood, sweat, and tears? So that is the reality. And I insist, all of this mixed with the huge investment in education, which so that it may the complexity of our issues may be understood better than is understood today. Thank you. And Central America and China. I have to be honest, I don't know enough of the issues of the treaties of Central America as to provide an answer, a solid answer to this issue. I would say that the integration before with the Chinese has to be an internal integration. You have to ensure that the energy integration in Central America, and I know that that still has a long term to be discussed. So I'm not in condition to respond concerning to what to do with China, but yes, of what to do within the region, and more integration. Only more integration can resolve that. Thank you. Yes, yes, the effective public management you mentioned, yes, and the exercise of democracy, many of them are related to the issue of, yes, transparent public management, effective with citizens' participation. Okay, yes, exciting. Here we got another question on geopolitics by Frank Felix Sosa. We have been able to observe that the Arabian countries are going to support Ukraine, the Ukraine. Why is the reason? There is a double standard. It's the how quick to condemn an invasion as done not so fast, such as the invasion of Iraq. So there are regional issues that are related to the dynamics of the region that make this to weatherize the unconditional answers. So behind all this, there is a certain concern that the line to measure is not the same for all of them. So, and there is this a double standard measurement for the issues of the refugees. It's as it was described by this student, the speediness of the Ukrainian migrants, how it was resolved, is far from what Syria, Afghanistan, and many other places. Somehow there is the High Commissioner for the Refugees highlighted there is a certain the double standard in this facility related to common past, common values, religions. So this is a serious issue because the issue of the refugees, I didn't mention it. There are so many other things that it's difficult to cover everything. But the issue of the refugees is central for all the challenges that the world is facing nowadays, and into a context of the worsening of the conflicts due to climate change, under a context of the worsening of the conflicts due to the insatisfaction of the citizens to solve their own economic issues, will deepen the movement of people, and it is very important to find a solution, because the societies will be impacted by this, without a doubt. We have Mr. Alonso Ibeca, Associate Professor from Santa Maria University in La Antigua, asking what role can the Latin American states play that acknowledge the universal jurisdiction on crime, serious crime, to punish morally the possible war crimes is affecting human rights and genocides by the Russian Federation. I believe not only the countries in the region, and again, going to the meaningful of the Latin American role, there are many in the coming to all of these conventions, these treaties. I would say that that being able to frame properly what it means this invasion of Russia means, it's very important. Not all of the tools are there. Some tools that still have to be developed, but I believe that to being able to think that at some time, as a last step to apply these principles that may condemn from those principles, that's very important. I always remember, and if you allow me 1 second, when during the chemical weapons in Syria, I had a direct participation. I had the possibility to create a response concerning the chemical weapons that probably some may remember, that ended, we were able to get 95% of the declaration of chemical weapons from the Syrian government. So many people said the United Nations is naive. First, they accept the declaration of the government, the Syrian government, and secondly, they don't even extract 100%. That percentage was already in hands of the ISIS. And obviously, we were able to extract 97%. So they wouldn't reach the hands of ISIS. But the Syrian government had not adhered to the agreement on chemical weapons. So the first thing was to adhere them, and secondly, to extract what I just commented. The fact that the Syrian government adhered to the convention has a huge meaning, because since then on, the Syrian government can be measured by its consequences and by the non-compliance. So I believe deeply that the power, this calling, this accountability of those countries that don't comply with their commitments, and what the professor has just described is one of them, so that we do it as a region is fundamental, because it puts us into a position, moral position, of being able to demand the others to comply with that. Obviously, not all of the countries are adhered to it, and if I remember, some countries are not adhered to this convention. Okay, thank you. From Colombia, we have a question by Alejandro Marañón. Colombia, as a partner, faces in the new Petros government a new paradigm in its position and vision on its foreign policy. From the start, it kept silent to the complex situation in Nicaragua, when the former government had radical positions on rejection for human rights. And also, the former government decided to reject the invasion of Russia into the Ukraine. Do you think that this position, more ideological and pragmatic, of the new government in Colombia may change its vision for the Russian invasion, as well as a power review, including the getting out of the NATO? I am not in a condition to respond if the new government is assessing leaving NATO, I don't have those elements. I believe that we have to be very careful in defining exactly the how far there is a support of these other states due to ideological positions. The reality of the human rights in Nicaragua is unquestionable. So I believe that it's important to be able to express that. I believe that there are values and principles that should go beyond the ideologies. And I believe that human rights is one of them. Here, once again, we have a situation, a complex situation concerning China, because what China says is that human rights are not included, the economical rights, and the economic rights should be part of the human rights. Honestly, yes, I agree that the economic rights should be part, but not only the economic rights, the political, the social, and economic. So the point or the issue that China supports strongly, they say we have done all of this by our people, and it's not acknowledged by human rights. It's valid as much that all of the rights are considered, and the freedoms as well. So I cannot respond on behalf of NATO, but I can emphatically say that human rights, when they are violated, they have to be questioned independently from the ideology of the government or violating them. I have two more questions. One from Leo Alex Vallecino. The governments should be smart and adhere to the two powers, China and the United States. Commercially speaking, what would you recommend to our governments to reach that ideal, knowing the participation of the other powers? And by Hernan Posada, Russia has partners in Latin America. These countries could play a role in the regional geopolitics. And Hernan Posada from Panama. When I suggest this, somehow the equidistance, the equal distance, the balance, balance is the word between the United States and China. I recognize that it's not easy to achieve right now. That's why I appeal to a third player, and that's Europe, because I believe that an association with Europe makes us stronger in this managing the balance. I believe that we have to be very, very serious in this relationship with other states, any state they could be, and especially for the two powers, as I have described. We have to start from the needs and the priorities of the country, and we should acknowledge that we are capable of being partners and working with the two powers in those terms that may be convenient to the country. I know it's not easy. Personally, I've had to negotiate it. It's not easy. But when one of the two powers, whichever it is, denies the opportunity that the other may participate, one has to be capable of saying, so you will give me this that the other one was giving me. And that's where you see clearly there's no room that may comply or cover any of the powers. There is room for both of them to become partners. What we have to do is to do it in the terms that we believe are fundamental from the priorities of our countries. That's why it's so important, the regional vision, because if the region comes together, if the region works in a joint and coordinated way, the possibilities to formulate solutions that may, of equal distance, are higher. And I insist of using the Europe as another element of a balance. Concerning the partners, Russian partners in Latin America, I believe that those partnerships are very tactical partnerships and by specific communities. And I don't think they may have an impact in the geopolitics. But it is true that Russia today has a role and room in the region that not so long ago didn't have. So we have to view carefully and preserve that vision of what Russia can contribute with and manage it in a prudent way. And in order to close, let me ask you a question from OAS. You have mentioned the importance of the regional integration and also of the regional organizations. So what role do you consider could have the OAS in that sense, in that regard? Taking into account the context where we are today, in the context also polarizing that the region is going through and the positions of the governments in the region in that sense. Well, it's a question and with a difficult response because nowadays the OAS plays this community of the Americas. In that playing together of the Americas, in that combination, there is not always the interests are shared. I believe that the role of the OAS is a role that is fundamental in balancing the perspectives of the different parties in the region. What do I mean by this? I believe that there is a polarization, yes, geographically, and a polarization ideologically. So we have to try to build bridges. And I believe that it's difficult to resolve an angry position with another angry position. We have to see the common things that can be accepted to build, starting from that. So it's possible that we may not think in the big issues, at least in the short term, but which are those things, the minimal things, that may establish a dialogue and start to generate the dialogue, because what would that people maybe they are around the same table, but they don't talk to each other, even when they are around the same table. And that is the first priority that OAS has to have, to reconstruct what was an institution of with a strength and a presence and impact beyond the region. Because as I stated before, when the United Nations was created, what was the OAS was a reference for the charter. So I believe that we have to go back to the minimum, the basics, because on the agenda of basics, there is a possibility to build a long term. Thank you so much, because we finished then with a hope for the future and good suggestions on how to start with. So actually, Susana, we thank you so much for sharing your time, your experience, your reflections, your knowledge with all of us, and by having enlightened us in this context to understand better what's happening, happening in the world today. I also thank you from our Secretary General, who had to leave, but he asked me to thank you and appreciated your participation. So also I take the advantage to thank the authorities from San Martin de Porres University and for sponsoring this initiative of the Cátedra of the Americas. And I thank you, the audience, the participants today during these 2 hours of dialogue around this important issue. We ask you to continue with us, follow us in our social media. So we will be responding. We will post in some announcements, especially for our next Cátedra of the Americas, which we'll have a face-to-face and virtually in Peru soon. Thank you so much to all of you. A pleasure, and Until next time, have a nice day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye for now.